So just got in a nasty Twitter battle, not on my part, but I don't respond well when people are obnoxiously dishonest in what they say and why they say it. Um, but there's a gal on there who made a post on what she thinks is the equivalency between female promiscuity and male porn use and its effects on marriageability. And um, come to find out through some back and forth, in her opinion, all sin is equal. I said all sin will equally keep you out of heaven, but all sins are not equal in their long-term effects here on earth. And in essence, what she was saying was to make a difference between those things, and any sins, is to minimize the power of Christ to change people and to forgive. Now, forgiveness, and if you're watching this channel, it's no surprise to you that I believe this, but forgiveness is, it's God's delight to forgive us of our sins, and it's a free gift for asking. That's forgiveness of past sins, right? But that doesn't negate future consequences. I told her, I said, if you chop off your legs in a fit of rage and then pray to God for him to forgive you for that stupidity, he will. And your legs aren't going to regrow. You'll have to deal with that for the rest of your life. And she said, well, what about Lazarus? He died and he was brought back to life. And what about, the man born blind? I said, in both of those cases, those people didn't do those things to themselves. Lazarus was sick and then he died. And, obviously the man was born blind. What would be a better example of this are the lepers that Jesus healed. So if you remember the story, there are 10 lepers. Now, leprosy is really interesting, and it's a wonderful thing that Jesus gave us the example of healing those people, because a person who lived the law of Moses could never get leprosy. Those laws would prevent you from coming into contact with anyone who had the disease or any of their, juices that they leave behind, because the law kept you from them. And so a person who was obeying God's commandments at that time would never have leprosy. So the fact that he healed them would have been a great example for her to use to argue her point. And she didn't do that. But suppose she did. I would have come back and said, exactly. And how many of the lepers came and thanked Jesus? Just one. You see, they were sinners to get into the consequence of the sin, and they remained sinners thereafter, even when Jesus healed them. To make my point crystal clear, here's the problem, and the scientific evidence supports this. Women really have a problem pair bonding with a man if they've already done so with other men. Now, you notice I didn't say have sex with. And this actually makes it even more serious, particularly for Christian people. It's even more serious than what they're arguing against. It's not a question of physical virginity. That comes with the territory, but there's a much more important thing that's bigger and easier than that. It's just romantic commitment to a man who's not your father, your brother, some person you're related to. Romantic, I mean to love a man, right? To love a man. And they're going to have relationships with their family, but to have a boyfriend even, it can impede a woman's ability to pair bond. And it happens just with one, statistically speaking. And that's the thing, right? People will say, well, I know a person, or I'm a person who had a serious relationship with a man and a romantic relationship, and I have a great marriage with a different guy. And I never regret it, and I never look back, and I'm never comparing, and I'm never this or that. Well, fantastic. You're the one leper. But how many other lepers are there? It was a 1-to-9 ratio, right? And what it comes down to is, it's not an argument to say that there aren't exceptions. It's an argument to say there should be an expectation, and it's rational for a person, a man in this case, to look at things that have long-term consequences and say, statistically speaking, even if this person has repented of a sin, statistically speaking, there are going to be long-term consequences. And with enough faith, they could be conquered, absolutely, okay? Absolutely. But how many people that die, like Lazarus, are raised from the dead? And how many people who are blind are healed? Right? How many lepers come and give thanks, even the ones who are healed? You see the point with all of this? It's a completely rational thing to say, hey, if I have a choice between someone who's way more likely to be incapable of giving me what would be required to make marriage worthwhile, if I'm a quality man, I'm going to prefer people who don't have that fault. Why wouldn't you do that? It'd be like saying that men should see obese women the same as thin women in terms of marriage prospects, because all fat women could lose the weight. It's possible. Well, and that's a great example, because you can lose the weight, and how many times out of 10 is a woman not going to have permanent issues like flappy skin and all this other craziness, right? Even if she does lose the weight, and even if she does keep it off, which both of those things are statistically unlikely. If she hasn't done it already, if she couldn't do it as a single woman, how is she going to do it with kids? You know, and all this extra stress and far less time to work out. So this is a very rational position. And so why do people argue against it and say crazy things like all sins are equal and all this other nonsense? It's like, there's only one reason. It's because they feel guilty. That's the reason. And lo and behold, the women who argue this, they have promiscuous pasts. They have not come to grips with it. The thing is when you take two sins, and in this case specifically, we're talking about female premarital promiscuity and male porn use. If you bring the one down to the other to make light of it, it's never going to make you feel less guilty. It's not going to work. And it doesn't. These women, they're on a crusade for the rest of their lives to minimize female promiscuity. Why? Because they've never fully condemned their past selves. They're one of the 9 lepers. Until you condemn your past self for any sin, you have to look at yourself from the past and say, you know what? That was the wrong thing to do. I knew better. And that was very, very bad. And until you really feel guilty about that, you're always going to feel guilty about that. The only way to rid yourself of future guilt is to condemn your past self. That's part of repentance. The other part of it is going out and doing what you can to prevent other people from making the same mistake you did. And ladies like this are doing the opposite on both counts. They're saying, what I did really wasn't that bad. It doesn't make me less of a person. I'm totally the same as I would have been because Jesus. Well, guess what? She absolutely doesn't appreciate her husband. She absolutely ignores all the things that she should have to go out of her way to give him, because now it's not going to come naturally because she's sort of blown that up. And he's definitely getting less, okay, than he would. She's also not doing anything to prevent other young ladies from doing this. She's doing the opposite by saying, hey, sow your wild oats, because you can just erase that. You can be a born-again virgin. And that's really, really false, okay? It's not true. So what about, if we look at the other side of this, what about porn use? Well, look, I am the last person to try to convince people that that's anything you should mess with at all, ever. However, when I look out across the sea of people I know well enough to say something about this, let me put it this way. There are things you can do that will cause long-term harm after you do it even once. What are some things like this? Meth, right? Meth will mess you up. Or heroin, right? Or premarital sex if you're a woman. And yes, there's a distinction. We work differently, men and women. You know, you can shout at the night sky about it or just accept it. It's different. There are things that you can do, and if you take them to the extreme, they will cause long-term damage. Obesity is like this, right? If you overeat just once, it's not going to hurt you. Yeah, Thanksgiving dinner, you have some like 5 slices of pie. It doesn't matter. You're fine. Okay. You do it every day, you're going to gain tons of weight. That's going to cause lifelong problems, right? There are things that you can do them often and they'll cause long-term harm. And then there are things that you can do that will only cause harm while you do them. And wherever porn is, it's not on the only once list. Okay? So what's the point of this? It's not to make that sin any less grievous. That's not my point. But there are women out there, lots of them in the Christian church, allegedly, who say that those two things are equivalent, that a guy watching porn is the same as a woman sleeping with a man that's not her husband. That's crazy. That's crazy. It's insane on all levels. Anyone who says that is so incredibly dishonest that they are a very dangerous person. If you're willing to say that the sun's not shining while it's shining, you're willing to say something that overtly false, you're willing to do all sorts of terrible things. And that's a really, really bad thing. So here's the level of dishonesty. You take any of these people who would say something like that. Let's say they're a mom, and you ask them, so are you just going to let your kids, if you had the choice between 2 babysitters, and one of them's like a normal, 16-year-old girl, the other one is a grown man who at one point molested children. Now he's repented. He says he'd never do that again, and he's ashamed, and Jesus has changed his heart, which can happen, okay? So it's just a toss-up. You see no objective difference between these two things, and you might say, well, like I'm more comfortable with a 16-year-old girl just because. Okay, fine. A 40-year-old man who had never done any of those things, and a 40-year-old man who had, but he said he repented. Are you seriously saying that they're equivalent? Of course you're not. Of course you wouldn't leave your kids with a repented child molester, right? So why are you saying these things about male and female partnerships, marriages? You don't even believe what you're saying. In the level of dishonesty, it just makes me nuts. I can't believe that there are people out there like that. Here's another example. So if a woman had 2 guys to choose from in dating, and the one guy had a conviction of domestic violence, he straight up punched his girlfriend in the face and knocked her out cold. The other guy didn't. But the first guy says, no, but that was a different version of me. I repented, and Jesus changed my heart. If you think that it's a toss-up between them, feel free to say that female promiscuity before marriage doesn't make a difference. Feel free. But if you would make a difference, and I don't know any woman that wouldn't, because you know what? If she went with the guy who had the record and he punched her in the face too, everyone would feel bad for her, but no one would be surprised, right? Why are we so dishonest about these things? And hopefully you get that this matters for much more than the topic at hand. It's just an example of a principle. And that principle is that we really need to think in terms of true equivalencies when we're talking about sin. This has so much to do with not just our personal repentance, how we see the world, how we value things, because if you see all sins as equivalent, you're going to do very bad things. Why? because to you, it's the same penalty as doing something that's not terribly wrong. I'm not saying porn fits into that category. I'm just saying, like, one of these little white lie situations or whatever you think would be a little sin. I'm probably the worst person to ask about that, but whatever you think of as a little sin, you're going to think that the penalty for whatever that is going to be the same as doing something huge. Now, again, all those things will keep you out of heaven. God can't tolerate the least degree of sin. But what we're talking about here is not our status with God. It's the long-term temporal penalties of our present sins, or our past sins in this case. It's not all the same. It's not all the same. You know, stealing a candy bar is not the same as robbing a bank. Murdering someone is a lot worse than calling someone a bad name, right? And it matters because the path to getting away from all of this is a correct ranking of the value of things. Because you might say, like, well, what does it matter so much, the correctness of our ranking of the bad stuff? Because your ranking machine is the same for all the stuff. Your appraisal of value is the same for all the stuff. If you're really good at ranking the bad stuff, you're also really good at ranking the good stuff, because it's all the same spectrum. So if you think all these things are the same, it means that you've terribly seared your ability to assess value. It is jacked up. And it means that you don't see the good things as good. And you justify really horrible things as being not so bad. You can take that to the bank because it's true. That's a principle. So we have to get better at calling out things that are really horrible and that no one should do. And especially the ones that seem like, well, I mean, what one time, how bad could it be? You know, what does doing meth once, what does it do to you? Doing heroin once, what does it do to you? Right? It changes you. And it changes you in ways that maybe you can recover, but you're probably going to be dealing with lifelong damage that goes just beyond the stigma. There's a reason for the stigma. I know a person who was addicted to meth when they were young. And this person is a fantastic person. I have no reservations whatsoever about them. I like them a lot, okay? But this person has had to structure their lives to avoid all sorts of pitfalls that normal people do not have to worry about. She does not, I said it's a she. She does not have the luxury of having an equivalent life to someone who didn't make the choices that she did. Is she a bad person? No, she's an awesome person. I like I said, I have a very high opinion of this person, but she has to choose to avoid certain things so that she just stays really far away of ever relapsing. So this is true for so many things. And porn isn't one of them. Unless someone has just totally gone off the deep end with doing that sort of thing all the time for a really, really long time, it just doesn't have the same effects. And that's not my opinion. You can look at the studies. There have been studies on both of these things, female promiscuity and male porn use. And to call them the same is just standing under the sun at noonday and saying it's dark. It's ridiculous. And it belies so much more. And the fact that no one can have a clean conversation about this on social media, it's just like blatant twisting of arguments. The peanut gallery's out there just trying to tear you down and do all these, say all these irrational things that make no sense. It's all ad hominem, whatever. It shows you just how much residual guilt there is. And I almost forgot to say this. Look, no woman should marry, I'd say should even continue to date a man if she finds out he's using porn. And every woman should ask the guy she's dating, when was the last time you looked at porn? That should absolutely be a conversation. And I'd say if you're waiting past date 2, you're wasting your time, because even though it's a personal question, the right kind of guy is going to be glad you asked it, because that's value he has that the world doesn't have if he can answer it correctly. Something like 87% of men actively use porn. That, I mean, just to make clear, like, this is a disqualifying thing in the dating market, in my opinion. If you're a woman, why mess with any guy that does that? And you have to understand that only 13% of men qualify. Just on that one, it cuts it down. There's a completely distorted view on both sides of the availability of people worth marrying. But now let's flip this around. How many women have never had a serious boyfriend? Right. So you start to see what the reality is. And when you're just talking on the internet, odds are you're going to get a guy, if you say something bad about porn, you're going to get a guy in 87% who tries to minimize the effects of that. That's not me. And then if you say something about female promiscuity, you're going to get a woman from that very high percentage who tries to minimize it because they feel guilty about it. The only people that have any business getting married are guys who aren't using porn and who haven't in a long time, at least, if not never. And then for the women, guys, you have to understand that statistically speaking, the more serious boyfriends a woman has had, the less she will be able to pair bond. It's a fact, and she can overcome that, but you're really working against a lot of things that are unlikely to change and or are likely to relapse. I'm not saying she's going to cheat on you, but the likelihood of you having a sterile relationship with that woman is astronomically high, because it's very hard to uniquely give to someone something you've already given to someone else. And intimacy with women is like that. From women is like that. I know so many men from Gen X and millennial categories. So we're talking post-pill, right, in the 60s, who have sterile marriages. And the reason is because the women had serious boyfriends, if not more, beforehand. And they didn't know. But now we know. And the data's out there. And you can talk to all these guys online. They're more than willing to talk to you about their experiences. People are opening up now because it's so bad and they're sick of it. They thought it was just them and that there was something wrong with them. And they come to talk to friends and everything, and it's just everywhere. And I have tons of guys that come to me and they talk about these things. And it's sad. It's sad because they didn't know what they were getting into, and they wouldn't have married who they did if they did. And the younger guys can avoid this. And for the women who already made the choices, oh well, the honest thing to do is not to trap guys into a situation that they wouldn't see as worthwhile if they knew what it would be like ahead of time. The honest thing to do is to be upfront about it. Be one of the lepers that came back and thanked Jesus, and understand that a guy who takes a chance on you when you're a woman who's statistically speaking has radically reduced her pair bonding ability, that is a wonderful blessing to have a quality man who still loves you and who's still willing to deal with that, because it's like, you're not going to like this, but it's like adopting an abused dog, which I've done twice. Okay. And I've had dogs that have never been abused because we got them either as puppies or raised them ourselves in a loving home. And it is a night and day difference, and it never goes away. You know, I've got a dog that we adopted who lived in a cage for 3 years, the first 3 years of his life. And we still have to watch him because he'll pee in the house when no one's looking. And we just can't break him of that. And he still acts weird if you touch his tail, like anywhere on his back flank, because he used to get beaten there, right? Now he's come a long way because he used to try to bite me every time you touch his collar. He doesn't do that, you know, and he doesn't try to bite people anymore, but he still has issues. And Treating these things as equivalent is just inviting people into a life of misery, while also de-incentivizing young women from not doing that. It's really bad, and they should avoid it.